So you will have worked last year with the unit circle and radians, and you would recognise that a whole rotation around the centre is 2 pi radians. So going halfway around the circle is pi radians. If it's 2 of them all the way around, then it's 1 of them halfway. So let's talk about some of the other radian measures that we have around the unit circle. So if we're measuring, and we always measure from the positive arm of the x-axis, if we measure up to the vertical line here, what we've got is a half of pi, half of that yellow angle, and a half of pi we write as pi on 2. And since this angle here is a half of pi, if I divide this angle in half again and come around halfway, that will be a quarter of pi, which is pi on 4. And so any fraction of pi that is less than a half will be in this quadrant here. And any fraction of pi which is greater than a half will have the angle this way here. So you'll notice that I'm writing the angles in radians out on the edges of the unit circle. And so what we're actually measuring is from the positive x-axis, from this arm here, rotating around just like I rotated the point around before. So if I turn to there, the angle that's created up to this point here is pi on 4 radians. If I continue the circle, continue around the circle and make this arc here, the angle that's created is pi on 2 radians. So the other 2 main angles that we look at in this first quadrant are pi on 6, which is 1/6 of pi, which is quite small, and 1/3 of pi, or pi on 3. Now you'll notice that I haven't been writing any radians symbols next to these angles, because usually if the angle has pi written in it, it's the little radian symbol is usually omitted, so we don't normally write that. So let's have a look at what happens in this next quadrant. Now, all of our angles that we're going to be working with at the minute with the unit circle are measured from the x-axis. So the first quadrant ones we measure from the positive side of the x-axis up to in an anti-clockwise direction up this way. In this second quadrant here, we're going to be measuring from this arm back this way. And so we're going to have angles that are around to pi and then come back a particular amount. So let's look at the equivalent one to pi on 6, equivalent angle to pi on 6 in this quadrant here. So this is the angle coming back this way that matches this angle here. So this angle that's in here is in fact pi on 6 coming back this way. And so the angle that we're measuring all the way from the start branch here all the way around this way is in fact 5 pi on 6, because we've come all the way around to pi and then come back pi on 6. So pi minus pi on 6 is 6 pi on 6 minus pi on 6, which gives you 5 pi on 6. So the numerator is 1 less than the denominator. And that's the same if we come back around pi on 4 to here. If we come back around pi on 4, we'll end up here. And so this angle will be pi minus pi on 4, which is going to be 3 pi on 4, or 3/4 of pi. And the same with pi on 3. And the same is true if we measured from our starting position around into the next quadrant here and came past pi and an extra pi on 6, then what we would have here will be an angle that comes from the start around to pi and then plus another pi on 6. And you can see that I've got this here in colour. I'll go back and colour up these other ones as well, just to remind you that we're actually measuring from here and around. And so the same will happen with pi on 4 and pi on 3. In the last quadrant, in this quadrant here, we could continue on our journey around the unit circle and do our measurements coming all the way around to 2 pi and then coming back. And so we'll do that first. Or we can start from 0 here and measure in the opposite direction and use a negative value for our angle to show that we're going in the opposite direction, that we're going in a clockwise direction instead of anti-clockwise. So let's look at pi on 6 for both of those options. So if we're using the 2 pi option, which is to go all the way around here, and then we're pi on 6 short of 2 pi, then our actual measurement itself will be 2 pi minus pi on 6. And 2 pi is 12 pi on 6. Take away pi on 6, which is going to give us 11 pi on 6, which is 1/6 short of 2. Now, the other option is we can just come in the negative direction starting from 0 and around this way. And coming in the negative direction means that we're going to have 0 and we're going to be coming negative pi on 6. So we're negative pi on 6. We're starting at 0, coming round just this short distance here. And so that gives us our negative pi on 6. And we can do the same thing in this quadrant with our pi on 4, which gives us 7 pi on 4 or minus pi on 4. And finally we can do it with pi on 3, which will give us 5 pi on 3 or minus pi on 3. Now we've done all of our angles all the way around the circle here, but there's no reason that we should stop at 2 pi. Why can't we continue on up here? So if we started at 0 and went around the whole circle, we will have done 2 pi to here plus another pi on 6 would make this now 2 pi plus pi on 6, which is 12 pi on 6 plus pi on 6, which is 13 pi on 6. And if we went around the circle again, we would have 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi plus pi on 6, and round and round. And we can go that way. We can do the same thing in the opposite direction as well, generating an infinite number of rotations around here and an infinite number of angles.